Hello, folks. This is Andrew Gilmore with another episode of Mostly Movies, Maybe Music. And I've been getting some nice feedback on the shows I've done so far, so thank you, people out there, for that. And my guest today is Jordan Young, who is an interesting guy. He wears a lot of different hats. He's a film historian, he's a journalist, a playwright, published author. He's written a lot of books about various aspects of entertainment history and has a pretty wide range of knowledge on that subject. And we became Facebook friends maybe, I think, 8 years ago, something like that. And we've never had the chance to actually meet before because he's from California, so it's unlikely that we'll meet face to face as such, but at least we can meet face to face virtually. And when I started doing this show, I thought he would be an interesting guy to interview because he's done a lot of interviews himself. He's met a lot of famous people and has a lot of stories about that. And he has all kinds of interesting things he can talk about. So we'll see where it goes today. So, Jordan, thank you for joining me on the show. It's a pleasure to finally meet you.
Pleasure meeting you, Andrew. Yeah,
Thank you. So,
I have been to Philadelphia several times.
oh, you have?
So possibly we will meet someday.
Well, I hope so. So let's just start at the beginning. I know basically that you started watching old movies when you were a child, that you had a friend who showed silent films to you and that kind of thing. So, how did you progress from that to and just enjoying old movies to studying them, doing research on them more seriously?
I think I just got, I just got started at the age of 6, by the way.
Yeah,
Just going over his house and watching 8 millimeter uh, Black Hawk cut downs or shorts or and watching I mean, he turned me on to not only to silent movies, but to old time radio, the whole
sure.
range of, yeah, radio was still a going medium then, but
Yes,
from 12 to 1 in the afternoon, you had reruns of Jack Benny and Burns and Allen on Los Angeles television.
right.
And I only lived a block from the school, so I would come home for lunch every day and watch Benny and Burns and Allen reruns.
Sure.
That's starting at about age 6 or 7. Eventually got to meet both George Burns and Jack Benny and see them in live performance. But anyway, progressing from there, I don't know. I just got more and more interested in this. I guess at the age of 12, I decided I was going to become a writer. It was simply the junior high school English teacher holding up my paper and my best friend's paper as exemplary essays one day, and the light bulb went off. I thought, hey, I'm good at this. Maybe I could do this for a living. And
Yeah,
I took journalism in high school and
right.
started writing film reviews and stuff for the high school paper. Also started interviewing actors who were doing plays in high school for the high school paper and then for the college paper. And when I got out of, I just started doing it before I graduated college, but in earnest, once I graduated, I started interviewing actors for the Christian Science Monitor was the first uh, well-known paper, and the Los Angeles Times a few years later. And I did a few. The first piece for the LA Times was on Mickey Katz, Joel Gray's father. For those of you not familiar
Yes,
with him, but he was a comedian and a band leader, and he made these English Yiddish parody records. Starting with, he started out working for Spike Jones, and then he did his own records. But he was the very first interview for the Times, and then I started doing character actors for them. And after I did a couple of those, I became known as, the guy who did that. So I interviewed a few silent film people like Laura LaPlante and Clyde Cook for them, but mostly it was just character actors. That was what they wanted me to do. So I ended up doing, I don't know, a couple of dozen pieces for the Times. But
right. You kind of got ahead of me there because you
uh,
answered some of the questions I was
I don't
going to
know.
ask.
just try to
But
answer the question, but
yeah, that's okay. But well, you mentioned Laura LaPlante, and she's one of the featured stars at Capitol Fest this year. So
hmm,
what was she like?
I'm just gonna turn this phone off here.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, Laurel Pant was a telephone interview for the Times. But then I did get to meet her. I We needed some photographs. I was at Palm Springs one day, and I just or Palm Desert, I forget where she lived, and I went over the house and took some photographs of her. She was very nice, a little shy. Actually, I don't think she wanted to be interviewed particularly. She hadn't really done any. She had done very little publicity, being retired for so many years. She wasn't doing interviews or publicity anymore, and I
Yeah.
don't. She was kind of reluctant to be interviewed. She had done a maybe after the interview and before I got down there to take some pictures of her. Life magazine did some feature on silent movie stars or something, and they took a photograph of her she didn't particularly like and showed her how you know old her hands looked,
Hmm.
and she was kind of upset about that, I remember. But so she was, yeah, reluctant to be photographed, reluctant to be interviewed, but very nice. And I didn't become friends with her because she lived out in Palm Springs or Palm Desert. I only had the one meeting with her. But
Yeah.
quite a few of the people I interviewed for the LA Times did become friends, like Anita Garvin, who
Hmm.
worked with Laurel and Hardy. She
Yes.
became a very good friend.
Well, tell me something about her.
I'm sorry.
Tell me something about Anita.
Yeah. Anita, and it was really a guy named Bob Satterfield who was I guess at that time the head of the Sons of the Way Out West, head of the Sons of the Desert, the Laurel and Hardy Appreciation Society. He invited her to a meeting, and she had gotten many of these invitations over the years, but she always rejected them. She never came to any of these. And Bob's, she was married to her married name was Stanley. She was married to a guy named Red Stanley,
Right.
who was a had worked with different bands and stuff in the 30s. Unfortunately, we didn't find this out until he was already gone, but because he was uh, very quiet, very he want to invade Anita's spotlight, but I guess, but anyway, Bob Bob said, if this is Mr. Stanley, bring him too. And that was all it took for Anita to, I don't remember if I don't think she brought Red to the first meeting, but that was all it took for her to accept this meeting to come to the Sons of the Desert. And I met her and told her I wanted to interview her and sold that idea to the LA Times, went out to the house with Randy Skretvet, a longtime friend of mine, uh, who was let's see, yeah, 78. I don't think he just started working on the Laurel and Hardy book yet, which eventually I published the first edition of his book on Laurel and Hardy. But Anita had not been interviewed in about 40 years. That was the very first interview, so it was great being able to sit down with her, and she wasn't shy or reluctant about it like Laura LaPlante. She was happy to be interviewed and to talk about Laurel and Hardy and Jimmy Finlayson and all these people that she worked with. But one thing that just hangs in my mind is her absolute outrageous sense of humor. She was very young when she started working with them. She was only about 21 years old
Right.
and just an absolute natural in front of the camera. Um, and her performances are just absolutely wonderful. I mean, they still hold up today, but
Yes.
most of it is just her own outrageous sense of humor, you know. And she had that right to the end. One time, Randy and I are having lunch with her and Randy has told this story, but we were having lunch with her at the motion picture country home where she eventually moved. And we're sitting there having lunch, and there's a loud crash to the kitchen. And without missing a beat, uh, Anita yells, "Wait for your laugh, honey."
That's funny.
Just brilliant. Yeah.
And speaking of silent films, I wanted to ask you about The Crowd because I know that's one of your favorites. And we should explain to the audience that The Crowd is a silent film from 1928, which I would recommend people should see if they haven't. And Jordan has written a book about it and knows quite a bit about it. So, how did you first see it? How did you become
It
aware of it?
is. Where's the book?
Oh, there it
Yeah.
is.
Speaking of which, yeah, and it is on Turner Classic Movies. What
Next
day?
week, I
Next
think.
next week. I think it's the 22nd. Look it up.
Yeah,
It's on about 3:30 in the morning or something. It was the time they usually run it, but they don't usually run it on during Oscar month. They just running. But it was nominated. That was
right.
the. But
Well,
I
people can.
saw it.
Oh,
I
go
saw
ahead.
it back. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say people can tape it if it's on at 3:30 in the morning.
Yes, set your DVR and record it, if you don't happen to be up at 3:30 in the morning. But
Yeah.
I first saw it in the early 70s when it was run on public television. They had a series of silent films. I believe it was included in that series. And I think that's where I first saw it. But after I saw it two or three times, I just, I don't know, I thought it was such an incredible film. I thought, let
Yes.
me do it. Let me write an article about this. And I couldn't sell the idea to anyone. I couldn't sell it to the Times. I couldn't sell it to, I tried selling it to various magazines and stuff. This is in the late 70s. But I interviewed King Vidor, and I interviewed his ex-wife, Eleanor Boardman, who was the star of the film.
Yes.
And these were both telephone interviews, but I did get to meet both of them. Eventually, there was a film called Love and Money made by a guy named Jim Toback. And Harry Ritz, the very last
Mm.
thing that he ever did, Harry Ritz of the Ritz brothers, was playing Ray Sharkey's grandfather in this picture.
Mm.
He worked one day on this picture. I was there on the set that day. I wangled an invitation to the set. He worked one day on this picture, and then he went into insulin shock on the weekend.
Oh my.
They had to replace him, and I guess assistant, producer or something knew King Vidor, and so he recommended him, and he came down from his ranch in Paso Robles and did this picture. And I was on the set one day when he was working. I got to meet him, and Eleanor Boardman lived in Santa Barbara, or a suburb of Santa Barbara. I went out to her house once when I was up there, and she was quite ill. She was bedridden that last year or so of her life.
Mm.
And she had this beautiful garden in her backyard that either she or somebody had planted. And she was very, yeah, very nice, very kind to let me come and sit by the bedside and talk to her for an hour. And
Mm.
but I should mention, I guess these interviews sat in my files for decades because nobody wanted the interview. And then about, I don't know, what, 12, 13 years ago, I ran across the file and I thought, this is a book. I can do this as a book now. I can do it as an ebook if nothing else. I discovered that USC, King Vidor had taught at USC and UCLA, and he split his archives between the two of them. And luckily for me, all the stuff on the crowd ended up at USC. And just incredible stuff, telegrams between uh, Vidor and his production people and the studio
Mm.
people. He went to New York and shot all this stuff on location at a time when it was not being done. Uh, Harold Lloyd did Speedy right after that in New York.
Right.
But but King Vidor was there first, and he was doing all this stuff on location. Um,
Right.
but anyway, it's somebody asked me the other day online what the film was about, and I said, "Well, I don't. It's it's just about an average guy going through life, and it starts out with big dreams and just gets beaten down by life. But
Yes.
it's my favorite, absolutely my favorite silent film.
Well, what is it about it that resonates with you?
Yeah, it starts out almost as a comedy, and then it just gradually gets more dramatic. But it's almost cinema verite style. It was like a documentary. James Murray, the lead in this film, was an extra that uh, King Vidor didn't want an established star. He wanted uh, non-stars.
Right.
Uh, so people weren't, you watch a movie with a star gets you to watch a movie, but then you're watching the star. You're always, even if you get involved in the plot, you're still always cognizant of you're watching, Clark Gable or
Right.
whoever it is, and he
Right.
didn't want that. He wanted, so he not a complete non-entity. He plucked him out of the extra ranks and gave him the lead in this picture. And the guy, James Murray, is wonderful. And Eleanor Boardman, Vidor had married her. She'd been in a number of pictures, but she wasn't well known. She wasn't a star.
Right.
I think that is the uh, best performance of the silent era. Her performance in this film. The
Yes.
only one that even comes close to it for me is Lillian Gish in The Wind.
Oh, yes.
I
Yes.
think Lillian Gish is the great actress of that era.
Yes.
Uh, but
Did you meet her?
I did not. I'm sorry to say I
No.
didn't. And she lived to be almost 100 years old.
Yes, she did.
I should have met her. I had seen a couple of her films on public television back in the 70s, but I don't think I had seen The Wind or The Scarlet Letter at that point. I'd seen some other ones that maybe were less impressive. I don't know why I didn't. And mostly I was interested in character actors and comedians and things,
Yeah.
not so much dramatic actors.
Right. So, just switching gears a little bit, I wanted to talk about you mentioned how you got started doing interviews, but I'm just wondering what the progression was and how you sort of gained momentum as a journalist, and that seems to have really taken off for you.
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Just how you progressed as a journalist. You started about how you talked about how you started out doing interviews, and then I'm just wondering what the turning point was where that sort of became a regular part of your life.
Ah, um, I know I had it in mind to do that. Like I say, from the time I was 12, I don't think I was thinking about necessarily writing about the entertainment field or concentrating on the entertainment field initially. When I started freelancing straight out of college, I was doing, more of a general, and that was a special interest, but I was doing plenty of general. I wrote for example, a company that published tree journals, association and society manager. So I was interviewing heads of organizations or associations, uh, doing, I found myself interviewing the head of nuclear medicine at Mass General Hospital one day and realized I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. So I
Hmm.
decided not to do that anymore. But I still continued doing general stuff for a long time. And then I guess when I started working on the Spike Jones book back in '83, that's when I decided just concentrate on that on the entertainment field and just do that exclusively. But I don't know. It's, I don't. I it just seems to me I've always been doing it.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, I guess you'll have to critique my performance after we're done.
Doing
Uh,
okay so far.
well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. Uh, well, I guess I can. Oh, I was just going to ask because we've talked about your interviews on Facebook, and I just wondered if you ever were nervous about interviewing someone. Did you ever get a little starstruck, or it sounds like you kind of got used to it.
Yeah, very little of that. I I don't know. I figured out very early on um, the way to do it was just to treat them like regular people, not
Of
to
course.
uh, don't put them up on a pedestal, you know, just and just talking to them like I'm talking to you, just like they're just I mean it's you think, you know, I interviewed John Lennon, for example, on the
Yeah.
telephone. And a friend of mine who's a huge Beatle fan. In fact, really, he was the one who turned me on to the Sergeant Pepper album. I wasn't a Beatle fan before that, but he said to me, you know, how the hell did you interview John Lennon? I just treat him like an ordinary guy, you know.
Yeah.
Uh, it's hard to think, you know, you're sitting with Jack Nicholson on a movie set or something, and you're talking to him like he's an ordinary guy. Obviously, he was a big star. This is 50 years ago, right after it did Chinatown. But I don't know. I've had the ability to just talk to them like an ordinary person, and it's it's not that difficult. And you know, it's not that I don't get autographs. I save that until after we're finished. You know, then
Right.
I might pull out a still and have them autograph it. And a couple of great quick anecdotes about that. I did not interview Walter Matthau. I met him several times. I was on the set of the very first movie set I was on was Billy Wilder film The Front Page with Lemon and Matthau, Jack
Right.
Lemmon, Walter Matthau. And then the other one was Buddy Buddy, which is Wilder's last film. But and it was on that set that after Walter Matthau had shot his scenes that morning or whatever, he's walking back to his dressing room, and so I'm walking with him and chatting, and I pulled out a still photograph and asked him to sign it, and he looked at it and he said, "Boy, I sure am getting to be an ugly old bastard." Uh, and Ozir Mostel, I saw him in a revival of Fiddler on the Roof and went backstage. And I had already met him once before, but I I had a still for him to sign, and he took his makeup crayon and he drew a mustache. That was a shot from Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum where he's clean shaven. So he took his makeup crayon and he drew a mustache on it. He said, "Now it's a work of art. Now it's worth something." Uh,
That's funny.
yeah,
There are a couple of names I wanted to ask you about. I know you interviewed Lionel Stander, and that's I'm kind of his cousin was a friend of mine, so I'm kind of sentimental about him. So, what was your experience with him like?
I met him. Actually, he was at the opening night of Fiddler on the Roof because he was an old friend of Zero's. Actually, Burgess Meredith and Carroll O'Connor,
Wow.
both of whom I'd already interviewed, were there, and Lionel Stander. In fact, uh, they're in the lobby during intermission, and I went to the men's room and I looked, and I think Carroll O'Connor is standing on one side of me, and either Lionel Stander or Burgess Meredith is on the other side of me, and I'm just
Wow.
looking straight ahead and thinking, "Don't pee on your shoes," you know. But anyway, I met Lionel that night and told him I wanted to interview him about Jack McGowan, with whom he co-starred in Polanski's Cul-de-sac. And so he gave me his phone number, and we did a phoner. And then several years later, I called him and uh, did a phoner about his working in radio. He started in the early 30s. Yeah, well, he started in the late 20s on stage, but I think his very first experience with radio was working with Fred Allen. He was a regular on
Mm,
the Fred Allen show back in the early 30s, doing all sorts of character voices and stuff.
right.
But there were lengthy interviews. I never had any other contact with him or became a friend of his. Um, easy to talk to, willing to talk, but kind of, I would say gruff, but I don't know. I don't know. He wasn't given to lengthy responses, but he had some great stories about working on cul-de-sac with Polanski and about working with Fred Allen and things like that. And uh,
Well, what were some of the stories that he told you?
well, um, cul-de-sac was a film Polanski made before he made Rosemary's Baby. This is when he was very little, not very well known filmmaker working at, and he shot this on an island in the north of England. And things did not go very well. The weather was horrible. The food was horrible. He had fights with Donald Pleasence and Lionel Stander and Francoise d'Orléac, the three stars of the film. Uh, and yeah, and he was working on very little money, and the producers, there were a couple of guys who made what passed for porno films until they decided to finance one of Polanski's previous picture, Repulsion, and then Cul-de-sac. He was working on very little money and fighting with these guys, and so Lionel had great stories about that. One of the things he did to make this experience pleasurable, or at least something you could survive. He called the Stage Deli in Manhattan and ordered 40 pounds of pastrami to be flown out to this location, to this holy island off the coast of northern England, pretty close to the Scottish border. And things like that. And I don't know. He didn't necessarily, I don't think he really owned up to the fact that he was fighting with Polanski or with the actress or anybody, but it's interesting stories about things like that. But,
Yeah.
and then I wrote a book about Polanski and about that, mainly about the making of that film, because I had interviewed Polanski, I had interviewed Donald Pleasence, I interviewed Lionel Stander, I interviewed Jack McGowan, and other people who worked on it, producer Gene Gutowski. I had all these stories, and I thought that would make a great book, but I decided not to do it unless Polanski was going to cooperate. What were the chances of that? He'd give me an interview back in the 70s, but this is only about uh, that was about 8, 9 years ago. And I contacted him through his agent. I remembered he had an agent in Los Angeles, and I got hold of the guy, which took quite a bit of work. But he said, "Well, I don't know. You want to? What do you want to do? You want to send me an email?" So I put what I wanted in the email, and he forwarded the email to Polanski in Paris. Polanski said yes. Uh, he would send me the shooting script, and he had a secretary who had a copy machine, a scanner. So she's not only scanned the shooting script, but his his call sheets for every day of the production,
Mm.
which I would not have thought to ask for, and a few other things. And that was the cooperation I wanted. He wanted to answer questions. He was, tired of talking about the movie, but I needed some kind of cooperation to, otherwise I just wasn't going to do it. But
Yeah.
where's that book here somewhere? Uh, I'm not just trying to promote these things, but anyway,
Yeah.
so I
There you go.
eventually did this book on and this, I mentioned this Lionel Stander and Jack McGowan.
Mm.
Uh, and that was the original impetus for interviewing Lionel, was because I was working on a biography of Jack McGowan, which came out in 1987, and at this moment, as we speak, I am working on a revised edition of the book for Bear Manor Media.
Oh, good.
And many people aren't that familiar with Jack McGowan, but he's in a lot of movies. He's in The Quiet Man and what else? Polanski's next film after Cul-de-sac and the Fearless Vampire Killers.
Mhm.
One of the few starring roles he had. But anyway, I interviewed Jack McGowan. I was still in college. He was out here doing a one-man show based on the work of Samuel Beckett, who's my favorite playwright. And I went to see it. I went backstage to meet him. Then I went to his hotel and interviewed him. And then he dropped dead a year later, and I
Oh,
decided I would write this book. But that's another whole story, which you
yeah.
didn't ask about. So,
Oh, I wanted to go back a bit because you mentioned Carroll O'Connor. What was he like?
Carroll O'Connor.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was another one I interviewed for the McGowan bio, along with Polanski and John Lennon and a lot of other people. But Carroll O'Connor had started out working at the Dublin Gate Theatre. He was not Irish. He was born, he was American.
Right.
And, but he, I guess after college, whenever he decided he would go back to Dublin and work at the Gate Theatre. Two guys named Michael McLeamore and Hilton Edwards, who were mentors of Orson Welles, by the way. The Dublin Gate's not as well known as the Abbey Theatre where McGowan worked, but James Mason came out of the worked also at the Gate, and Carroll O'Connor worked at the Gate Theatre with McGowan, and so he had some interesting stories about that, about um, just this is the early 50s, and just knocking around and going to pubs afterwards and things like that. Um, I went out to his house in Westwood, near West LA, to interview him, and I had a tape recorder, I had a little tape recorder, but he said, "Ah, just use my tape recorder," and it turned out that he had checked the batteries in it.
Oh,
The batteries weren't needed to be replaced. He wasn't aware of that, so it messed up the thing a bit. He said, "Well, sorry, I fucked up your tape." Yeah. But, and then I ran into him that night when I went to see Fiddler on the Roof, and also Burgess Meredith, who was an old friend of O'Connor's and of McGowan's and of Mostel's. Uh, I interviewed him at his beach house in Malibu. So Carroll O'Connor dropped by when we were just coincidentally when we were doing that interview. Um, O'Connor was, uh, I would say, fairly down to earth.
hmm.
I mean, he was a big celebrity at that time, obviously,
Sure.
because he was doing all of the family, but he was very down to earth and very nice guy. And actually, I met him one other time. He was at Burt Mustin's memorial service. Burt Mustin was really the first actor who befriended me, character actor. He was on All in the Family many times. I'm sure
Yes.
people recognize that face
Yeah.
instantly because he was on every show, every television show in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, early 70s. Anyway, O'Connor was sitting in the front row at the memorial service and just jumped up and said a few words about him, and yeah,
Yeah. Well, those are interesting stories. Thank you.
uh,
And
yeah.
I know you're a little pressed for time, but there are a couple of other topics I want to touch on before we go. And you sort of mentioned early on your interest in old time radio, but tell me more about how that started.
Same friend that introduced me to silent movies when we were 6 years old. His father had made him kind of a walking encyclopedia of entertainment of that era. His father was very interested. His father claimed to have met Al Jolson. It was probably true. He knew Lawrence Welk. Uh, And anyway, just his dad had turned him on to all this stuff. So huge Al Jolson and Eddie Cantor fan, Burns and Allen, Jack Benny. There wasn't very much to listen to back in the 50s. If there was, as a kid, 6, 7, 8, 10 years old, 12 years old, I didn't know how to get hold of the stuff if it was out there. Every once in a while, you would find something. You would find an LP or something that would come out.
Right.
Uh, old radio, old comedy shows, and things like that. Um, and I don't know. Edgar Bergen appeared on it's the early, I would say 64, maybe 65. There was something like a 40th anniversary of NBC or something like that. Big a radio special, and they got Bergen to headline it. That was a big deal,
Yeah.
and you listen to that. But there's very little out there. You would hear occasional shows once in a while and stuff. And Bergen was one of the first people I met. He was doing appearing at Lake Tahoe. I was about 16. We went to Lake Tahoe. So Jimmy Durante one night, and saw Edgar Bergen the second night.
Mm.
Uh, Went backstage and met him. And actually, I have a picture of myself sitting on his lap uh, and doing you know, like a Charlie McCarthy type, dummy,
Yeah.
stare. But I know it was very interesting to me. But like I say, there's very little out there. Now there's so much stuff, I don't have time to listen to it all. I wish I did, but there's tons of stuff out there. I've got tons of stuff on tape and on record, and this far more than I can ever listen to, which is easily accessible now. But there's so much stuff out there. I don't have time to read it, watch it, listen to it. You know,
Yeah.
as I'm still working. I'm still
Right.
sort of semi-retired, but I still have things to do. But
And I know you met a lot of radio writers, and some of your books cover that. So, could you tell me about some of your experiences there?
well, my friend Randy Skretvet, he was the one who came up with this bright idea about 35 years ago. We should do a book on. Actually, I had published this Laurel and Hardy book, and he pitched to me as an idea a book that he wanted to do himself. But I thought he meant a book that we should collaborate on to do an oral history of dramatic radio. And he approached me with this idea. And initially, I said, "Well, there aren't enough people left to interview." And he said, "Yes, there are." Well, we started making a list. And between us, ended up interviewing about 125 people.
Wow.
But we would go out to Los Angeles and sometimes do two in a day because of a long drive out there. And pretty soon Randy got tired of going out there, and he said, "I'll tell you what, I'll do the research, write the questions, and you like doing the interviews more than I do, so you go out and do the interviews." And some of them were over the telephone, and some of them were many of them were in person. But I think the first writer. I think the first writer we interviewed was Hal Cantor, actually,
Mm.
and he was ill, but he still gave us an interview. I later got to know him pretty well, and I think Paul Henning and Sherwood Schwartz I interviewed shortly after that, and of course Paul Henning is well known for the Beverly Hillbillies, but
Right.
he started out writing for Fibber McGee and Molly back in the 30s, and then he wrote for Burns and Allen for over a decade. That's what I wanted to talk about: Fibber McGee and Molly and Burns and Allen, and he just a really nice guy, very down to earth, wonderful stories about those early days. And Sherwood Schwartz, of course, very well known for Gilligan's Island and the Brady Bunch. I didn't want to talk about that, as every other single person who ever interviewed him apparently did.
Right.
I wanted to talk about the radio days. Sherwood Schwartz had an older brother who was writing for Milton Berle, Al Schwartz, and Sherwood had intended to become a doctor. He was going to medical school, and his brother, like I said, writing for Berle, had got him an opportunity to write for the show, and the medical career went in the ash can, and you know he just started out writing for actually for Bob Hope, and then he wrote for Armed Forces Radio, and he told me he only had an hour when I got there, but then he had another interview that got canceled. Fortunately for me, so I ended up talking to him for 3 hours.
Wow.
Um, but as a result of those interviews, I said to Randy, I said, these the writers have the best memories, they have the best stories, they're the best raconteurs, the best storytellers. Uh, Once I had interviewed Paul Henning and Sherwood Schwartz, I just went after every writer I could find and interviewed about a dozen comedy writers. Um, one of them that I wanted to talk to actually for the Spike Jones book was Eddie Maxwell. Uh, Several years earlier, Eddie Maxwell was one of Spike Jones' writers, and
Hmm.
I called him up, got his phone number, called him up, and told him I was doing a book on Spike Jones, and he said, Spike Jones was a no good son of a bitch when he was alive, and now he's a dead son of a bitch.
Wow.
And I almost dropped the phone. Nobody had ever said anything like that to me. Certainly, no one had ever attempted the interview or anything, ever had said anything like that. And uh, see, he didn't want to talk. And it was only several years later that I got to know him and did get to interview him. But by then, unfortunately, he'd been ill and his memory wasn't so good. But so he's not in the book because I just didn't have uh, much to put in there. But I do have a dozen comedy writers who are in this book, and I those are some of the best interviews I ever did. Almost all of these guys, they weren't terribly well known. Hal Cantor and Lyra Gelbart were fairly well known, but apart from that, uh, I mean, even the Paul Henning, Beverly Hillbillies, and stuff like that. I mean, but most of these people were not well known. They certainly had never been ever asked by anybody to sit down and talk about their radio days, uh, and so they were all very happy to talk to me. Park Levy, uh, I unfortunately never got to meet. He was ill. I think it was Bob Schiller, who was one of I Love Lucy's staff writers, had asked me if I'd interviewed him, and I said, no, I didn't even know the name. And he said, no, he was one of the original writers on Duffy's Tavern.
Hmm.
And Ed Gardner, the star and creator of Duffy's Tavern, was an absolute wild man,
So
and
I've heard. Yeah.
had the reputation of giving almost anybody a chance. Yeah, Dick Martin of Rowan and Martin even claims that he worked for a week on that show or something, but Ed Gardner would give almost anybody a 1 week as a tryout. And I think Bob Schiller told me Ed Gardner hired and fired him several times. But there's a lot of stories about Ed Gardner in that book because Park Levy and Bob Schiller and a couple of other people all had fantastic stories about what a wild, crazy guy Ed Gardner was uh, off screen or off mic. But Park Levy was a fantastic interview. We had to do it in short since he was quite ill at the time. Uh, I would call him up. We'd talk for 20 minutes I think at the end of the first session, the first day after 20 or 25 minutes with him, he said, "Well, that's all I can give you today because I'm very old, very sick, and I have to entertain four women tonight."
Okay.
Uh, but Park Levy had written for Al Jolson. I think his very first radio show back in the early 30s. He'd written for Ben Burney. He'd written for uh, Jack Pearl, Baron Munchausen. He'd written for Burt Lahr. All these guys back in the early 30s. Uh, but he was a fantastic interview. Uh, Great stories about Jolson being very stingy and not wanting to pay him. Uh, they're walking out Central Park one day or something, and uh, yeah, just walking and talking, and Park Levy said something about the fact that Jolson owed him money, and Jolson says, "It's a beautiful day, the sun is shining, the birds are singing, yada yada, and you want to talk about money?" You know, he just and he's working on a script one day, and Jolson calls him and says, "Yeah, change it. I want to do this instead of that." Okay, so he's up all night writing, and then Jolson calls him. Either he calls him and reads him what he has, or Jolson calls him and says, "No, I changed my mind again. Switch it back to what it was." He stays up all night writing. He switches it back, and then Jolson calls him up again. He says, "Yeah, I changed my mind again. I don't want to do the goddamn show. Just tear it up and throw it away, and just make it. I'm quitting the show." And it
It
just
sounds like him.
yeah.
Well, also you mentioned, speaking of radio, you mentioned meeting George Burns and Jack Benny, and I shouldn't let you go without telling those stories.
Uh, yeah. George Burns, I wrote him a letter when I was 18 years old, 17 or 18. I guess 18. I had written an article on the local newspaper. Um, just it was Burns' birthday, and I just wrote a little piece about him, uh, and I sent it to him. And I got his address somewhere and sent him and he wrote me back a very nice letter and sent me an autographed picture and other still photographs from his collection, you know, original stills. This is 1969. But he had a reputation for doing this kind of thing. He was very friendly, very down to earth, very approachable. Um, I met him a couple of years later at there was a place called the Maskers Club in Hollywood where Burt Mustin had uh, I went there to see him in a play, and then any time that I was in LA, I could call Burt. He would invite me down to the Maskers Club, and I would just hang out with him and his cronies and watch them play poker or bridge or whatever. The people like Frank Phelan and Vince Barnett, and there's a whole raft of character people. We would hang out at the Maskers Club. But one night I went to see a play by Steve Allen there, and they had this thing after the play, they had this tradition of down in the bar, down in the basement. They had what they called low jinks, and whoever was there would just get up and do some shtick or sing or whatever. And George Burns was sitting there one night, and they asked him if he would get up and do something. This is 1972. This is before the Sunshine Boys. He's kind of retired at this point.
Right.
After Gracie had passed, he spent about a decade where he wasn't really doing much of anything. He just the occasional appearance or something, but kind of more or less retired. And he just got up and did 20 minutes. And I'm sitting about 10 feet from him, you know, at this table. It's just fantastic. And I exchanged several letters with him. I had questions about, uh, I had understood he had worked with Stan Laurel in vaudeville, or Stan Laurel, not worked with him, but Stan and May Laurel were on the bill with him back in vaudeville days. And I had questions about that. He wrote me a nice letter and gave me some anecdotes about that. And then Randy and I interviewed him on the telephone. And Randy had sent him a copy of a record that he did not have, that he had made with Gracie back in the early 30s, some rare recording. And George invited Randy to come up to his office and smoke a cigar with him. And Randy did the smoke, so he never took him up on it. But talk about a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
Uh, he asked me about Jack Benny.
Yeah.
I saw him work live once. This is at a concert, 1969, a little place called Melodyland, uh, which was in Anaheim, not far from Disneyland. And it was a venue that was in the round. And the two guys that ran this place were two old entertainers. So they knew everybody, and they would get Jimmy Durante down there. I saw him again. But anyway, they had Jack Benny down there, and you've heard stories about Jack Benny's extraordinary timing.
Mm.
Uh, Absolutely true. But I got to, I mean, you really had to see him live to get the full, you know, uh, impact of that. To see what an extraordinary uh, person he was, especially in terms of the timing. But
I'm
I
sure.
give you this example. So he's just in the first couple of minutes of the show, he's doing some shtick, some jokes and stuff, and he's wearing this new sport coat. I don't know, maybe he had it made specifically for doing this type of thing, but he's wearing this new because I don't know. I mean, he didn't do this on television, so he might have the following week it might have been in New York or Philadelphia or Cleveland, and we're doing the same stuff anyway. But he's talking about this new sports jacket he has, and he opens it, and shows us the paisley lining in the jacket. And of course, this is 1969, so it's the height of the psychedelic era, whatever, you know. Paisley was a thing. You don't see it too often now, but he shows us the paisley lining of the jacket, my nice new sports jacket here. And then a couple of minutes later, somebody comes in and takes a seat. This is right in the beginning of the show. He hasn't been on stage 5 minutes. And somebody else walks down the aisle, takes a seat, and he turns to them and he starts telling them about the paisley lining of the jacket. Okay. 45 minutes into the show, right? A guy walks down the aisle and takes a seat. And Benny walks off the stage, walks up the aisle, walks between the seats. Excuse me, excuse me, excuse me. In between the seats where people are sitting. The guy's in the middle of the row or something. He walks right up to the guy and he opens the jacket and starts telling him about the paisley lining. I just about fell on the floor. Absolutely the funniest thing I've ever seen anybody do ever. Uh, yeah,
I'm
I
picturing
just,
it in my mind.
yeah,
Yeah.
just, so, uh, I saw Bob Hope once, but I didn't really, I was just at Disneyland and this is quite elderly and he just got up and lit the Christmas tree. You know, they had him
Mm.
come in on his scooter or something and light the. I never got to see him work live, but so I only know him from the movies and then the TV specials, which were not
Yeah.
very good in my opinion.
Yeah.
But to me, he kind of lost his timing, and he should have retired,
Yeah.
much earlier. Of course, he didn't want to retire. He just went on and on until till the end, but practically. But Burns certainly had the timing. Red Skelton, uh, I saw 3 times.
Mm.
Um, Much funnier live than I ever on television. Uh, but Benny was really the king as far as Well, and I met him backstage afterwards because I knew the publicist, and so I had arranged to go backstage and meet him. And he expected me. He knew I was coming backstage, and a couple of friends like Ernest Borgnine dropping by.
Mm.
But I came in and he walked out to meet me, and he was in his underwear. He
Mm.
hadn't he hadn't realized that. So he sheepishly excused himself, and went back on, put on a robe or something, that came out, greeted me, and we chatted for a few minutes. And Mary was sitting on the couch
Mm.
along with a few of his uh, colleagues were friends. But it was just a short meeting, but he was very pleasant, very nice. Almost everybody, I was going to say, almost everybody I ever met, almost everybody I interviewed was very nice, with very few exceptions to that. But
Sure.
one of them was a guy named Bernard Miles.
Oh yeah.
He's the chief villain in Hitchcock's remake of The Man Who Knew Too Much with Jimmy Stewart. British stage actor primarily, but
Yes.
he's in several films. I think he's in David Lee's Great Expectations. Um, Pretty good actor, but a real prick.
Mm.
Uh, he had he had a theater in London, and he had asked Jack McGowan to uh, produce and star in a Sean O'Casey play there. And so I wanted to interview him. I didn't know much of anything other than what I just told you. So I didn't have much to, he said, well, I'm doing a play at my theater. I'm not on stage during the first act. So come back to my dressing room at 8 o'clock and interview me. And I'm starting out with sort of icebreaker questions since I don't really have any information about this relationship or anything. When did you first meet him, or how did you come to ask him to appear in your, produce a star in this play at your theater? And I wasn't there 5 minutes, and he says, "Well, what is this? Where are your questions?" He says, "You go and you write 20. Yeah, you go and you write 10 biting questions, and you come back, and I'll give you marvelous answers." And then he threw me out.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, and he wasted my evening. Not only didn't get the interview, but he wasted it and was just really nasty to me. But he wasted my evening, because it's 8:05 and every show in the West End of London starts at 8 o'clock. Uh, and there's no movies now because they've all started at 7:45 or 8 o'clock. All the shows have started, but maybe that was just how nasty he was to me. Also, Ralph Richardson was pretty
Mm.
rude to me. Uh, you didn't ask me about this stuff, but you're interested in these interviews and things.
Sure.
And I saw John Gielgud and Ralph Richardson in a play by Harold Pinter called No Man's Land, which I did not like, but they were both very good in it. I just didn't like the play, but I wanted to talk to Ralph Richardson about working with Jack McGowan and Dr. Zhivago. They had some scenes together. McGowan played um, the guy who drives the coach. He takes him out to the Winter Palace or something, and he drives the you know coach out there. But so John Gielgud comes out first, and he couldn't be nicer. Very friendly and nice and smiling and chatting with people and signing autographs. And then Richardson comes out. He's very uh, gruff, and he had his motorcycle parked right outside the stage door. He walked out and hopped on his motorcycle, and I approached him and I told him I wanted to talk to him and about working on Dr. Zhivago with McGowan. And he said, "Well, I haven't got time for that." Just revs up his motorcycle and drives off, but very abrupt and very rude. Uh, you know,
Mm.
and,
Well,
and such a contrast to John Gielgud. As I say, could not be nicer.
at least they gave you stories to talk about, even if they were
Uh,
negative stories.
oh, I could I could go on for hours, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe you had some other questions that I haven't answered, or that
Uh,
I.
Yeah, just a couple other things I want to touch on, but just going back to Benny, I wanted to ask you if you ever met Mel Blanc.
I did at a convention where he was, I think they were doing a panel or something, a little, you know, thing with him where they just asked him questions. And so I just met him for a moment. I didn't really get a chance to talk to him. I could
Okay.
I could put you in touch with somebody who knew him very well, a guy
Oh,
named Walt Mitchell.
oh yes, I know
Uh,
Walt.
yeah, okay. But yeah, he'd be a good person to talk to about Mel Blanc.
Yeah, he's a
I
good
can't
friend.
really tell you anything.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there's one other topic I wanted to touch on, and that's the fact that you're a playwright, which is something we have in common. So, tell me something about your writing.
Oh, I didn't realize that you wrote plays.
Well, I dabbled in it. I never was very serious about it, but
Uh,
I used to write things here and there.
Actually, yeah, I have. I recall it now that you mention it. You've written comedy sketches and things, and
Yes.
yeah. I started college. Samuel Beckett has really been the biggest influence on me,
Sure.
but also Jules Feiffer, who just passed away.
Yes.
Uh, he was a huge influence on me. Uh, I was, started reading his cartoon strip when I was in high school, and then his plays that he was writing and books and things, and his was a big influence on me in terms of his sense of humor and things like that. And I mean, I really identify with Woody Allen in terms of the his sense of humor and that type of thing. But he came along just a little bit too late to really be an influence on me the way, say, Jules Pfeiffer was. Um, but also Eugene Ionesco,
Yes.
uh, Theater of the Absurd was another influence on me.
Yeah, me
Anyway, I
too.
started. I
I was just saying Ionesco was an influence on me too.
okay, but yeah, contemporary with Beckett, they didn't really influence each other.
Hmm.
But I started writing little short pieces in high school, mostly in college, short sketches, um, 10-minute plays. Some of them were plays, some of them were just really sketches. Um, and then I started eventually writing some one-act plays. Then I turned one of them into a full-length play. This is in college, and then I just dropped it. I didn't do anything for. I guess I sketched out a couple of one-act plays on in longhand, but I never sat down and developed them or tried to, do anything with them. And
Uh-huh.
really, more than a decade went by when I was, well, Sam Jaffe. Uh,
Excuse me.
I had interviewed for the LA Times. He became a friend. I'm sure most people are, at least some people are familiar with him, but probably best known for appearing on Ben Casey and also playing the High Lama in Frank Capra's film Lost Horizon and the title role in the film of Gunga Din. But anyway, I had interviewed him for the LA Times. He and his wife, Betty Ackerman, became friends of mine. And Betty was also on Ben Casey with him. Anyway, after Sam passed, I'm over the house one day talking to Betty and getting some information and some photographs from my book, Real Characters. Uh, I pulled the cover of that out. There's a book on movie character actors. Most of these appeared in the LA Times or other newspapers. And she wanted to she wanted to do something with her career. She was still doing TV guest shots and stuff, but she wanted to do a one woman show about Edna St. Vincent Millay, who was the first woman to win a Pulitzer for writing poetry back in the 1920s. Uh, Social activist, uh, an icon of the jazz age. Uh, So I wrote this, she commissioned me. I wrote this one woman show for her. We did a couple of workshop performances, and that was the end of it. And then I rewrote it as an ensemble uh, play at the advice of this New York producer. And we did a Reader's Theater production of that. Then I mothballed it. And a couple of years ago, I pulled that out because I thought Millay had, it's been 70 years since her death. I thought that it was all public domain, but then I researched and found out it wasn't. Uh, that only the stuff she'd written in the early 20s was public domain. But during the pandemic, I wrote a couple of plays. One was a Holocaust drama. And then after that, I said I need to go in the opposite direction down and do something wild, crazy, and fun. So really realizing I couldn't dust off the Malay project and do it as originally intended. I flipped it on its head and I wrote this thing called Bela Lugosi meets Vincent Malay. And I am producing it's a one woman show, and I'm producing it at the Hollywood Fringe Festival in June. And that happened because I was calling friends during the lockdown and asking them how they were, checking up on my friends. And I called this actress, Rose London, who's a good friend, and she asked me what I was working on. And when I told her, she said, I want to read it because she was a fan of Malay's poetry. And she read it and she decided she wanted to do it. So uh, I said, let's do it at the Fringe. Oh, anyway, that's not really a resume of my playwriting, but I've written several full-length plays, a lot of one acts or short pieces, and I've had several of them produced. I had one of them done off Broadway. That's a couple of them done off Broadway, and they've been done in various theaters around the country and in Hawaii, and even one at the Melbourne Fringe Festival in Australia and stuff like that, and also on the radio. This actress I had interviewed, Peggy Weber, who was in her teens. She was probably the busiest actor in radio. Certainly one of the busiest actors in radio. Um, and she started producing radio theater when she was probably in her teens or 20s and continued to do it uh, well into her 70s or 80s. She's 99 years old,
Wow.
and still cooking on all burners, but she's certainly an inspiration. But I showed her some of the one acts I'd written, and at some point she decided she would produce a trilogy of my one act plays, and she had a stock company of veteran Hollywood actors, including Marvin Kaplan and Elliot Reed and Dana Herlihy and William Wyndham and John Aston and other people. And we did this trilogy of my plays. Uh, that's, yeah, pretty great.
Great. Yeah.
Kathleen Freeman. Uh, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I should let you get back to working on your book, but is there anything else coming up that you want to promote before we go?
Uh, nothing that comes to mind. But I mean, if you have any last question or two, happy to chat for a few minutes.
Well, that's about all I had in my notes, I think.
Uh,
But
yeah.
well, it's been a pleasure to talk to you, Jordan. Thank you.
Pleasure talking to you, Andrew. To getting to meet you for the first time, and
Yes,
maybe someday face to face. But
I hope so.
yeah, we can do this again sometime. But explore other things we haven't talked about. But I don't know. I've been as I say, I've been a working journalist for since I was in college, and
Sure.
I don't know. It's really something that okay. obviously things have changed. The uh, media revolution and everything. I mean, it's certainly much easier to, of course, publishing has been turned upside down by the digital revolution.
Sure,
I was publishing books back in the 80s when it was, it was hard. Acting as my own production manager and publicist and marketing guy and everything, and uh, printing. You had to print at least 1,000. In some cases, I printed 5,000 books, but everything's been completely turned around now with ebooks, and
sure,
I'm still publishing books with other companies, but I don't really have any special. I didn't start out with any really any connections or any you know special talents or anything. I decided I wanted to be a writer when I was 12 years old, and I just pursued it. I
sure.
just yeah. I encourage anybody to if you have a dream or if you have something you want to do, just go for it. And don't let anybody hold you back.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I think that's a good statement to end on. So, thank you for your time. I appreciate it, Jordan.
Pleasure talking to you, Andrew, and good luck with the podcast. And
Thank you.
take care.
You too. Thank you.
Uh,